Welcome to the Enchanted Earth podcast, where you will hear stories of nature with the power to transform our lives. These sacred stories are begging to be shared now. So listen in as my guest today shares one of their own. So welcome everybody. Today we have with us Rachel Woods, and let me tell you a little bit about Rachel. Rachel is a coach, supervisor, facilitator, podcaster, and is in the throes of writing a book so she can add author to that list. Specializing in psychology of behavioral change and a self-confessed tree hugger, she's determined to educate and attract professionals to partner more with nature for mutual benefit. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you.
I love that last bit. Really, I think that is one of the most important aspects of what you and I do, and anybody who's involved in eco-psychology and ecotherapy practices, is to help people deepen their relationship with the natural world so that they will eventually protect it.
Yeah, it's funny. It feels like an ulterior motive in some ways. And sometimes I think, oh, I'm being a little bit sneaky here or manipulative. But I'm not banging a drum to say, hey, you have to do this and you have to work like that. I came to a point where I thought, what can I do to blend what I do to make a living with influencing an appreciation for the natural world, an increased appreciation for the natural world. And I think from the perspective of encouraging somebody who doesn't consider their relationship with nature very often, or that has never stopped to think about what that is, and looking at it like, are they using it as a backdrop? Is it just a place to go, like when you want a holiday, or somewhere to go when you go for a walk? Or so it's just a backdrop, it's just a thing, it's an environment, the same as if you went shopping or something else. Or are you an appreciator? You might stop and take photos, you might spend more time in nature, targeting places to really go and look. If I could just tap into those that we know, we'd recognize and go, oh, do you know what? Actually, we're really lucky where we are. There's some great local parks, there's some wonderful patches of woodland. And therefore, if they were ever under threat, they would step up and say, no, that's not good. I will sign the petition. I will join the march. I seem to have to chain themselves to a tree, but I will stand for protecting this as much as I possibly can. If I can make that little difference, then yeah, I'm happy. It's just I'd like to do more, obviously. But it's finding those things that link in with the job that you do and meet the values that you have when it comes to the natural world. And it's a tricky one.
Yeah, but it is really a win. I think my goal is also that, but it's also to help people feel more joy in their life, to be more connected with their authentic selves. And that all just then naturally extends to, I think, caring for the planet.
Yeah, it's that nature. It's the nature of being human, isn't it? We forget we separate ourselves and think we're above it all. And we're so much more evolved than this, that, and the other. No, you share 17% of your DNA with the pot plants behind me, frankly, and some people probably more. So ultimately, why aren't we connecting with this more? Why is it that we are so much more calmed when we go out into natural environments? When we hear birdsong, we don't find it stressful, funnily enough, unless we have a phobia of birds. Obviously, there's always an outlier. But generally, we hear birdsong, tinkling streams, all of those kinds of things are soothing noises to our ears and our psyche. And that goes way back to a really simplistic need for food, which I hate to say. Singing birds means there's food around, right? Tinkling water means there's hydration, like crackling fires, shelter and warmth. Just those things don't disappear from our psyche, from our wiring, just because we're so evolved and we're all digital now. We all live in these concrete boxes everywhere. They don't disappear. We have not evolved that quickly from when we turned into Homo sapiens 300,000 years ago. Our wiring is not far different. Because evolution doesn't work that fast. It's not that quick.
So well said. Yes, Ara, the sounds in our environment have such a huge impact on our emotion and our feeling at the time. Yeah. Is there an experience that you had as a younger adult or child that you think foreshadows what you do now?
I couldn't say there is a singular experience. No, I had a kind of massive epiphany as a teenager or anything like that. I was always quite outdoorsy. I climbed the trees in the garden. I made mud pies. I tried to make perfume out of roses and water, which just turns into slimy, smelly water. Let's face it, doesn't ever work. But I tried frequently. Didn't learn from my failures either. I then got into horses. So I spent a lot of time, and actually, much to my parents' joy, I think most of my teenage years were spent up the stables getting mucky with horses rather than spending time going into town with boys. So they were very happy that I was doing that rather than the other. I didn't tell them there were boys up the yard, but everywhere you go, you can't hide from them. But ultimately, yeah, I've always had that draw towards nature and animals. I haven't always been so drawn to trees and woodlands and forested areas and chalk downs and big skies. And I haven't quite, they've always been a backdrop for the horses from when I was much younger. And then I think you go through your 20s and you say, oh, I've got to make a living. So I strayed away from it a bit. But even then, with my first dog, we'd get out a lot. He was very active. And then we had a spaniel and she was extremely active. We did agility. So we're going out, we're outside, we're constantly in green spaces. But it wasn't really until I did my postgrad certificate in coaching, or back in the early 2010s, essentially, that I started looking at coaching in and what nature could do for us while we were. Why do we have to coach indoors? Why do we sit in an office? Why do this wasn't happening very often, this kind of coaching, this Zoom call, Teams, tiny screens, only seeing this much of each other. It was much more, you would travel somewhere and go and sit in an office. You would do it face to face, but you wouldn't be side by side. You wouldn't be shoulder to shoulder. You wouldn't be walking somewhere, traveling together on a journey of discovery, of realizations, of epiphanies, of popcorn moments. So when I started putting those two things together, and that might have been a fairly pivotal moment, it's the fact that I did my coaching certificate at a place called Henley Business School. And Henley is a small town on the Thames, just outside Marlow, so fairly close to London. But it's got the most beautiful grounds, trees, and the river runs through it, and just lots of green space, and the geese visit and wake you up at 3 a.m, and all of this sort of stuff going on, all this nature surrounding this beautiful, big, white, almost palatial building. It's a stunning building. Very funny story they've got about that, is how it remained standing during the Blitz because Hitler wanted to keep it for himself. So it's a beautiful building on the Thames, and why wouldn't he? But you do wonder, it's quite an interesting story it's got. But a lot of the practice we did, because we had to break out and go and find private spaces, me and some of my peers at the time would go outside just because it was private space. And not long after that, I'm like, well, why don't we do more of this? So they gave the seed. So then when I went back to do my master's, it was Henley again. And that seed sprouted. And then it started spreading more. It grew more leaves. It started to really flourish. And it became rooted in my being that, no, this is a thing. This is something I need to do. So my dissertation was based on that. And then beyond that, I chose every opportunity to try and get people to come outside with me when I coached.
When was that? Curious.
Oh, gosh. So I did my MSc. I started it in 2015.
That is, it's pretty fascinating. So back in 2015, you got the idea to do this as your dissertation. So this was not common practice to do therapy in the outdoors.
No, therapy, yes. Actually, weirdly, when I was looking at the literature review, which was a big part of a dissertation, is to write your literature review. Obviously, all my peers are going out and finding all the coaching books about different topics. And I'm like, let's look for books that mention coaching and nature, or walking and coaching, or outdoor coaching. There weren't any, not really. An awful lot of the literature I had to draw on came from therapeutic areas. So clinical areas such as plants brought into nursing homes, or more biophilic design. In fact, I think there's GPs in Scotland that started prescribing time in nature for people with depression, and kind of walking clinics and things like that. The clinical and training world was ahead of the curve in front of the coaching and kind of mentoring space, and certainly in the leadership space. The leadership space is still very much off its Zoom. Actually, there's a lot of power about going to walk with your teams or one of your individuals to have a one-to-one. Again, eyeball to eyeball like this, it's a little bit of like friction maybe. As you're shoulder to shoulder, that drops away. Because you've instantly got that feeling. There's that physical feeling of camaraderie, and we are moving in the same direction because we are actually physically moving in the same direction. And then you layer in nature. And that's when the magic happens.
I was just thinking about this yesterday, how amazing it is to realize that it's only been about 10 years or less that something like forest therapy has been around.
So America, probably, 15 years tops.
Tops. I think it was maybe becoming more aware in, I can't even say it's that popular in popular culture right now, but I talk to so many people who do forest therapy, and they say back in, 17, I was finally drawn to it. It feels, wow, it's only been a decade, but it feels like it has been around for thousands of years.
Which is it?
Because it has.
But at the same time, it's also really new because we're only just waking up to it or reawakening to it. I suppose that's the crux of it, isn't it? We are reawakening to these thoughts.
Yeah, to me, I would love to hear how you view these two different practices, because what you do to me obviously is a one-on-one with clients, helping them with certain issues and challenges in their life, being out in that beautiful nature, where forest bathing or nature therapy, regardless if it's in a forest, is typically in a group and not focused on any particular challenge, but more about just being invited into experiences in nature. Can you just share a little bit about the difference there?
Yeah, it's interesting because we think about when you're coaching that it's a very specific discipline, and it's one of these disciplines where you're not saying you should do this or you should do that. You're asking questions, you're inquiring, you're being curious, you're helping somebody think about their problems and find solutions for themselves, but in a facilitated and structured way. The addition of nature is almost like having a third party in the conversation. So yes, it's a backdrop. It's a place to do it that automatically comes with calming and soothing auras, purely because of the nature of nature as it is, if you choose the right area and brief everybody properly in the first place. What happens when you are walking side by side? Some conversations will be, nature tends to be just the backdrop, and the conversation becomes very technical and very in the nitty-gritty of things in the moment. But you have the option to use pace. You can speed up, you can slow down, you can pause. You can walk ahead. You can use some of the NLP techniques around timelining, or visualizing the future, and literally go and stand in the future, walk down the path and stand 20 meters that way and look back. What would you say to the person standing here from that position over there? So you can start to think really perceptively about different positions using the space. Nature then is a tool. You're using it as a tool, as an extra prop, if you like, in the creative thinking arena. When it becomes more ingrained, and I think what you find is where we're quite prone to talk in metaphors a lot. Anyway, as humans, we learn through stories. We know that we talk in metaphors, and so many of our metaphors are nature based. And it's really funny because you have people that you're talking to in very what you consider to be digital technical environments, very swish glass box offices in the centre of London, in the Shard, and they'll still talk about going out on a limb or sowing that seed, or still these nature metaphors, because they just make sense. And when you are in it at the same time, you're almost living the metaphor. You can pause and stop, and you can look at something on the ground and say, you're just talking about that. What do you make of that? And suddenly they're going, oh, do you know? Yeah. So you start to talk about systems within organizations, and you can say, oh, I'm seeing all of this, and all of this is happening. All they're seeing is, you could quite often reference mushrooms. I'm just going to find them fascinating. But I'll say, well, look over there, we'll see like a clutch of fly agaric or something like that, which I get quite excited about because they're like the fairy mushrooms, the little red ones with the white spots. Oh, you get very excited when we see that. But what I find hilarious and fascinating about mushrooms is the bits above the ground are just the tip of the iceberg. The humorous bit to it is they are the reproductive organ. Tell a teenager that or a child that, they'll find it absolutely hilarious. The rest of it is this mycelium network that is underground. And it's huge and it's varied and it sends electrical signals. It helps trees talk to each other. And there's a huge system that means these little things can pop up and work, and means these things over here can work, and these things over here work better. So when you're talking to people in corporate organizations in their big glass towers and all the rest of it, for them to recognize themselves as, or the things that they're looking at, the figures in the arena that they're looking at, as just the things that show above the ground, and to get them to think about what is going on in the network beneath, what's happening in the gaps in between, the conduits. They don't stop and pay attention to those areas very often. So when they do, they're like, oh, hang on. Yeah, actually, there is a disconnect between that and that. Or it's not a disconnect. There's too much noise between that and that. There's too much discombobulation, almost too much communication. It's confusing. Clarity is required. We need to strip some of that out and make it simpler, or we need to add more in to make it clearer, to make it more understandable. So it's quite interesting when you can start looking at these things around you, because it gives you another metaphor, but it's a physical metaphor that actually exists. And when they realize that, okay, so by getting that and that right, it means these signals can pass from that to that. Oh, but then they can also pass to that. They can start to understand the ripple effects, the consequences and impact of their thinking, which moves them from operational to strategic, because they're thinking impact, they're thinking ripple effects, but also enables them to see a much bigger picture. Again, you can go, okay, so what are they all looking at? What are they all looking for? What are your team all looking at? What are your team all looking for? And it just gives them a different perspective, different lenses to look through. And it's fascinating what comes out. And sometimes you get to the end of a walk, and particularly with men, I find it's quite odd, really. We get to the end of a chat, of a session, and we're just at the car park and just summing up and getting ready to get in our cars and go home. And two of them have said exactly the same thing to me, months and months apart. Both of them said, you know what, I didn't intend to tell you that. Something is liberated. Something is released. And again, I think there's an element of the physiology of being shoulder to shoulder and side by side. It's not an area of research I've gone into, but I think there's a little bit of research on it, but there's not a lot. There's certainly not enough yet. But yeah, going back to literature on this stuff, I think there's still only one really credible book about outdoor coaching that exists. And that was written by Leslie Roberts, and it's brilliant. In fact, I've often said it's the book I wish I'd written, because she beat me to it. But it is absolutely astounding for getting started on coaching in natural areas.
I love that you said that those two men said, I didn't intend to tell you that. The other aspect of it is that we're maybe calmer, right? We're in this beautiful wooded area, maybe a slow pace, calming us, but also those aspects of it are opening our hearts. We're more vulnerable, maybe.
Yeah, I think the guard definitely comes down.
I mean, can you talk a little bit about that, being more open-hearted? Do you have any thoughts on how nature plays a role in that?
It's tricky with coaching, because there's something about the dynamic when you agree to enter into a coaching relationship. When you have rapport with your client is expecting you to be their coach, be that safe container for their thoughts, there tends to be more of an openness anyway. I do tend to see people say, oh, actually, I haven't even told anyone else that yet. And that's not uncommon in even just on Zoom calls. And I had a lady the other day who'd do exactly that, say, oh, actually, I haven't told anyone yet. Is it okay that I told you? I'm like, this is confidential. So absolutely, I'm not going to go and tell anybody. But yeah, I think there is an element. And when I was doing my dissertation, one of the most fascinating studies I found was a Japanese study. I was the home of Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing. And a group of researchers took, I think it was 228 subjects, and looked at them in urban environments, asked them some kind of qualitative questions, and then took some measures, some physiological measures using an EEG, so brainwaves, and blood pressure and heart rate, that kind of thing. They found an improvement across all of them in blood pressure and lowered heart rate, a perceived sense of more relaxation and calm. So in the qualitative questions they asked, that was what some of the kind of universal outcomes. And the really interesting thing was the EEG results. And I can't remember which type of brainwaves they are. There's a very specific type of brainwave that is associated with creativity. And those are the ones that spike and increase when we're in a natural environment, more so than if we're in an urban environment, I just found that absolutely fascinating. I think it's Tsunaga, and there's a load of other names. There's about 5 or 6 different researchers that are named on this paper. And that really struck me, like, finally, someone's done some proper research. And this was only in 1998, 99, something like that. So we're not talking that long ago. But yeah, it's funny about the open-heartedness. I think there's a physiological side to that, in addition to, I suppose you could call it spiritual, but it almost goes back to Edward Wilson and his kind of, is there a DNA link there? Is there a genetic cause that when we're in a natural environment, we just feel that way more for an as yet undetermined reason?
Yeah. There's so much more that we have to learn.
Yeah,
and that's what's exciting. It's very exciting. Yeah. Oh, Rachel, is any particular experience in nature stand out to you that was deeply moving to you?
Possibly. It's funny, there's an awful lot of times I go out and I see something for the first time, and it's something I've always really wanted to see, and I get quite emotional when I see it, if that makes any sense. So I have cried at sunsets at certain places. I have got very excited and jumped around when I've seen a certain bird or a bug or something that's just got me excited. We had a bucket list trip planned for 2020. Obviously, we all know what happened in 2020, so lots of holidays got cancelled. But we did manage to do eventually in 2022, and that was a trip to Costa Rica. And I was dogged about where I wanted to go specifically and what I wanted to see. And it was the cloud forest, and it was the hanging walkways, these kind of bridges, they're up in the tree canopy. And there was one moment walking across one of these bridges, and while you're doing it, you're appreciating where you are, but at the same time, you're trying not to wobble the bridge too much because they do swing them out quite a lot. So you're walking right down the middle and trying to not make it wave around too much. And there was the top of, I suppose, one of the lower trees, because you weren't up in the canopy, you were above its canopy. It was level with the railing. And it was swarming, which I assumed would have been like bugs or something. And there's a lot of bugs in Costa Rica, so you think, all right, fine. And I'm not great with bugs, but I'm okay. I'm not silly. And I paused and I realized it was hummingbirds. This whole tree was swarming with these little coalescent greens and blues, tiny, like about the size of my thumb, hummingbirds. And the noise, it wasn't buzzing, it was wings. And of course, they don't stop, they don't rest, they just, I've seen hummingbirds before. We've been in California, where my brothers live, and he's got a hummingbird figure in the back garden. So you do get them coming and going, but you don't see flocks of them like this. And I was just absolutely blown away. And it was more, when you stand on something like on the edge of a cliff, or you're seeing giant waves and you feel tiny, you feel really humbled and you feel really tiny and insignificant. It's like that. But it was just more that kind of awe of how on earth has the world made something so tiny and then made it so that it doesn't really rest. It just keeps going, and it has to do this, and it has to fly like heart beats at like hundreds of beats per minute. And that just absolutely floored me. And it was one of those, it was all like a big realization moment, but it made me appreciate, I suppose, how varied everything is. And that even if I don't understand the reason, there's some sort of ecological reason for everything. And I'm not religious. I'm not saying it's God's plan or anything like that, but I'm just saying there's an interdependency and interconnectedness with nature and us as part of the natural world, because although we separate ourselves from it, we are very much a part of it, that we overlook and don't stop. And on top of that, I don't think we stop and really dig into or anywhere near as often as we should. We don't tap into our sense of wonder, not like children do, not like when we're learning, not like when we're new somewhere. I was like, do I have to go to Costa Rica to have these moments? No, I don't. I can have these moments if I bother to stop and really focus on something in the, I'm just pointing over there because there's fields up there above my house. I can go up there and I can look into where there's a load of ivy on the wall, and I will see a whole little ecosystem of spiders and snails and earwigs. And in this little snapshot of about that big, if you stare at it long enough, you're going to see a whole little world appear. And then you realize how, not small you are, but how you're a very small number amongst a number of billions and trillions of others that you just don't take notice of a lot of the time. And it's, I don't know, it's just one of those, that I'd really encourage humans to just tap into that little bit more, because it takes you out of your own head. It really takes you out of your own head. When you're having one of those moments, you just can't see beyond the end of your own nose. Go and stare at a bush for 5 minutes until you notice something in there. And you'll come back feeling refreshed because you've been able to rest your brain for all this busy stuff and worrying about yourself you've been doing. And you've just stared at something else for a while. You've given your amygdala something else to do and focus on that it can do. And we can all access a wall or a hedge or a patch of dirt and notice a tiny thing crawling around. We can all do that wherever we are.
Absolutely. It is so true that it often takes the act of being removed from familiar environments to be in a new environment. Again, I talk about open heart. So you're more present, more aware. And I do feel that there's something about the heart space that's more open to embracing something different, something new. When we're in our home environments, we're just going about our habitual pattern of going here to there, checking this off the list.
Yeah.
And that old phrase, stop and smell the roses, is so true.
Right. I think sometimes safety comes into it as well, because we feel safe and complacent. Whereas when we go somewhere that's alien to us, we don't feel quite so safe. So therefore, all of our senses are heightened. We're noticing more. We're keeping an eye out for more, whether it's weird bugs and me assuming it was a swarm or something like that in Costa Rica, or whether it's me going for a walk up a field and just being, I go up there every single day with my dogs. I feel safe. It's okay up there. Everything's nothing going to hurt me up here. I'm a bit scared of spiders, so I don't go wandering off into places where I might find one, but I'm not going to get stung. I'm not going to get bitten. Nothing's going to kill me up there. So I don't stop and look at it. I don't pay a huge amount of attention to it unless I make myself do it. So I think you're right. And it almost comes down to opening the mind to that and then letting the heart follow. Because the heart will follow when the mind is open. If the mind's not open, then you're not going anywhere. You're not noticing anything. You're not going to stop and look. You're not going to pay attention. Therefore, you'll overlook everything. And you just keep going with your blinkers on in your own little world. And I think it's the healthy thing when we have the need to get ourselves out of our heads and recognize it. There's a very cheap, easy, free, nature-infused method of doing that right on our doorsteps.
Sure.
Or in a pot plant.
Absolutely.
In our window boxes. So I'm looking at the clouds, staring at the clouds for a while.
I'm going to prompt you. You mentioned seeing a sunrise or a sunset and spontaneously being brought to tears. Is there a particular experience that you would feel comfortable sharing about that? And going a little deeper.
Not a particular one. I think sunsets particularly have a metaphorical poignancy. It's called the end of a day, the end of something. And I think I have aging parents. I'm in my late 40s and my dad's 84, he'll be 85 next year. So I'm very conscious of there's going to become a time when we're looking at the end of his days and what his sunset's going to look like. So I think that may be that somewhere there is a subconscious awareness. But at the same time, funnily enough, one of the things I think I've inherited from my father, which I'm incredibly grateful for, he is a person that is so happy with the simplest things. He doesn't seek complication. He doesn't need the newest iPhone or this, that, and the other too. If he doesn't want an iPhone at all, he's not interested in any of that stuff. He will be overjoyed if he finds a rock with a hole in it on the beach. And I have quite the collection of rocks with holes in that he's given me because I like them. And he'll pick things up and think, oh, I saw this, Rachel, thought of you. I've got a pendant that I very rarely wear because it's chunky. And it's literally, he found an ammonite fossil. And it's just a piece of hamstone. It's not just, it's millions of years old. It's an ammonite fossil. It's not been polished. It's not honed into something gorgeous and beautiful and all the rest of it. I've got, this is how they can be when you polish them. Yeah, they look like this. This isn't. This is a rough piece of stone that's shaped like that. And he's drilled a hole in it and put it on a leather necklace. And I probably won't wear that out, but it hangs in my bedroom up by the curtain. So I see it every day. It's just there all the time. And I love it. I have genuine fossil. I have something that is millions of years old. And yet, when you think about it, all rocks are millions of years old. And I think that's, for him, that's, again, really humbling and really amazing. But he'll see it. Rainbows do the same thing. I think because of that, I've inherited a bit of that, but it just reminds me of those simple things. But then again, that emotional wave of there's going to be a day when he's not around anymore. And these things are all going to remind me of him. And that is both lovely and heartbreaking at the same time. And I guess that's the piece with sunsets, I think, because sunrises don't do that to me. Sunrises never do that to me. I might cry a bit if I ever see the Northern Lights. They visited us a few times over the last few months, and I haven't been awake to see them. I've missed them every single time because I am a heavy sleeper.
That's right. I was very lucky because I've been, over the years, anytime that we had an inkling of them, I would go to the beach. There's still lights around, unfortunately, but I would try to get to the darkest place on Long Island because we're outside of New York City, quite a ways out, but still, you don't see the Milky Way. And I have never been able to see them until a few weeks ago. I knew they were going to be out. Not sure if we were going to be able to see them, but my daughter-in-law texted me, go outside now. And it was like 7:30 in the evening. And I was going to go to the beach at 11 thinking they would be out then. But there it was, this fuchsia sky.
Wow.
Was amazing. It was amazing. I am just so grateful to have witnessed that. But yeah.
I think we're going to have to hop on over to Norway at some point and go and see them rather than trying to spot them from here. It's very hit and miss from here, to be fair. It's particularly this end of the country. If we're in Scotland, it might be a bit different, but this end of the country, I am right in the south. So yeah, it's very hit and miss here. But also apparently this year is one of the only years it's likely to do this for another decade.
Yes. Just really beautiful, amazing natural phenomena.
Yeah.
So Rachel, as we near the end of this talk, is there anything you'd like to share with the listeners?
The book, but they haven't written it yet. I have written it, but it's not ready yet. It's not coming out till next year. It started off, it's been really interesting as a process. It started off as writing it for other supervisors, to coach supervisors, to take coaches into nature for supervision sessions. And there's a handful of us that do that in the UK. And I would imagine there'll be more growing over the years. I think it's a bit of a growing movement. As I got writing, I thought this is for anyone that is in a helping profession, a talking profession. So whether that's mentoring, coaching, therapy, in leadership, if you're a manager or leader of people and you give us stuff about developing, supporting and empowering your people, then actually this could be a really useful kind of field guide, as it were, to getting started with that, with some exercises. And so it's evolved over time and it's still very much a work in progress, but I'm 40,000 words in now. I want it to be more useful and used. And the one wish that I have is that it becomes well thumbed. It becomes tatty to the point where somebody goes, oh, do you know what? I might get another copy of this because I've really wrecked this one. But it's okay. It will be out before spring. I have promised myself that by hook or by crook, both as a digital version and actually, like I say, a copy you can chuck in the backpack, scribble on, play with, muck about with. There'll be sections for supervisors, absolutely, sections for coaches, sections for everybody else. And obviously some logistics around what to take with you. What do you chuck in your backpack? I've had a lovely lady that I work with quite closely, and she's quite a good friend now, who works in the accessibility space and inclusivity space. And she's written me a lovely kind of summary of things to think about when you're being inclusive for folk that have different abilities when it comes to accessing natural spaces. Because if you think about it, you've got less mobility, natural spaces. Mother Nature is not kind to people who have disabilities in terms of walking or needing rest frequently, or even sensory issues with autism maybe, and the kind of the sensory issues that come with that, and other conditions, noise sensitivity, light sensitivity, phobias, all this stuff. You think, actually, if we are business professionals using nature as a background, as a tool for our business, we have a responsibility to nature not to do any damage, but at the same time, we have a responsibility to people to make sure it's accessible for them, and to think about them when we invite them into our spaces, because we can't just assume they can hike up that hill. We can't just assume they can even find the place you're sending them or you're bringing them to, because, as Melanie beautifully points out, she has calculia, which means she's terrible with directions. She's written me a beautiful piece that's going to go in the book. So I've got a number of contributors that are offering lovely insights. So yeah, that's the message, I guess, is for one, keep an eye out for that. That'd be great. And secondly, I think it's just that piece of notice what's around you, appreciate what's around, and notice what you notice, and then appreciate what you notice. How much do you appreciate the nature around you? What's your relationship with that? See it as a backdrop, somewhere just to go for picnics and exercise and sports and stuff, or do you see it as somewhere to stop and appreciate and take notice of, or do you see it as somewhere to protect? Are you protective of it? If it was under threat, would you step up and do something? And a lot of people don't ask themselves that question. And because they're not asked that question, we don't prompt them to ask themselves that question. And because you're not asked, you have to ask yourself, am I attached to that bit of green space outside my house? And if it was about to get dug up, would I get quite upset about that? Hell yeah. Okay, so what are you going to do? You're going to keep an eye on it. You're going to make sure it's okay. And if we start with our local spaces, then if everybody looks at their local space, the whole world would be okay. Because we don't look at what's important to us locally. Right. And it has more meaning that way. I think we get a bit overawed by all these kind of doom and gloom stories that are big and national. And I was looking, there was a TEDx, and I wish I could remember the name of the guy that did it. He was talking about this catastrophe fatigue, that we hear so many catastrophes in the news and the media just blow it up all over the place and get really dramatic about everything. That we just go, after a while, it just goes over our heads. We don't take any notice anymore. We've become numb.
Right. It is literally our heart closes.
Yeah.
And we just go, not important to me. We're not paying attention. Yeah. And that is so important, that point that you made. We just need to work in our own backyard.
Absolutely. When it's my local place, my air, my water, my woodlands, suddenly I give a stuff.
Okay. But not just our own backyard, but we have to work here.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
It all comes from here, right?
Yeah, for sure. Why is it? I love that so much. I say we use the word love. Oh yeah, I love trees. Do you really? What do you do to show your love to trees? Really? If you felt that was under threat, would you do something? Would you step up and say, "No, I'm not going to let you take that down. Unless it's disease, unless it's a danger, then no, you can't take that down. I'm gonna say something. I'm gonna write to in the UK, we write to our MPs, or I'm gonna contact my senator, or whoever it is that you would write to raise a complaint or a concern." What's your channels for doing that? And how do you tell that story to maybe use the press? It's always a good story. And I'd love to see more of those sorts of stories. Trees gets a stay of execution. Like it was due to be chopped down and all the locals pulled together and now it's still standing. And there's a fence around it. And that's protecting it or others from the things that they're worried about it doing, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. I could get on the soapbox forever, so I'm going to stop now.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on here with us, Rachel.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
You and I met, I don't know, many years ago on LinkedIn, I believe.
Yeah.
For our love of nature, for biophilia, for ecotherapy, and all of the kind of connections that we have together. Thank you so much. And I do want to ask people who are listening, if you liked this, please subscribe, please comment, please share your thoughts about this topic.
Absolutely. And find me on LinkedIn. I'm always welcome to chats and questions. And
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much and have a beautiful day.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you for being a part of the Enchanted Earth podcast. Comment below, share, And most of all, please hit the subscribe button so that you'll hear when we publish another inspiring episode. You can visit us at luminous-spaces.com for more information on our online courses, retreats, and offerings. Thank you and have a magical day.